Welcome, foolish mortals, to the Haunted Mansion. I am your host, your ghost host.
Well, actually, I will be hosting this tour through one of Disney's most legendary and unearthly attractions. Celebrated worldwide by millions of Disney fans, Imagineers, and theme park aficionados, no other attraction has been bestowed with such an enduring and fabled mythology as the Haunted Mansion. It's time to call in the spirits from somewhere beyond and make final arrangements now as we enter the boundless realm of the supernatural. The earliest heartbeat of a haunted attraction at Disneyland dates back to 1951 when Walt Disney commissioned art directors Marvin Davis and Harper Goff to work on a concept for a walk-through ghost house attraction for the park's Main Street, USA. The old house on the hill, as it was known, was to be situated at a dead end just off of Main Street. The idea never got off the ground, and Disneyland went on to open on July 17, 1955, with no manifestation of a haunted attraction. After Disneyland's resounding success, WED Enterprises quickly drafted expansion plans for the park. Among these plans was a New Orleans-themed section that would replace the park's scarcely themed Holiday Land, and with it, a new home for the Haunted Ghost House project. In 1957, Walt assigned animator Ken Anderson to create the building's architecture. Basing his designs on 19th century southern plantations and taking direct inspiration from the Shipley Lydecker House in Baltimore, Maryland, Anderson envisioned an outwardly neglected building as the site of the ghost house. Walt, however, was less than willing about having a decrepit manor in the middle of his otherwise pristine park. Wanting the same level of charm found throughout Disneyland, Walt approved Anderson's antebellum era style, but rejected the rundown appearance, decidedly commenting, "We'll take care of the outside, and let the ghosts take care of the inside." Walt's rhetoric held true. The inside portions went on to be inspired by the dazzling designs of the Winchester Mystery House in San Jose, California, and the fictional house featured in the 1963 film The Haunting. Meanwhile, Anderson was busy writing backstories for the attraction, including one tragic tale of a family that resided in the home. The story revolved around a sea captain who drowned at sea, and his ghost returned home to murder his bride by entombing her within the house. Other suggested ideas included sequences inspired by Disney's animated shorts and feature films, such as the 1937 short film Lonesome Ghosts, and the Headless Horseman character from the 1949 film The Adventures of Ichabod and Mr. Toad. Classic literary monsters such as Dracula and Frankenstein's monster were even considered for inclusion. Anderson eventually left the project in 1958 to focus on Sleeping Beauty, which was set to be released by the studio the following year. Dick Irvine, Rolly Crump, and Yale Gracie then took over development on the project. With Crump and Gracie leading the creative reins, the two began working on the countless technical illusions that the Haunted Mansion would later become famous for. Together, the duo and their crew set up shop inside a soundstage at the Walt Disney Studios in Burbank and designed dozens of ghostly apparitions with various special effects. One of these spectral effects is known as the Pepper's Ghost trick. The illusion is accomplished by illuminating objects that are then reflected onto a pane of glass, causing them to appear translucent to the viewer. As fate would have it, the effects were in fact so frightening that one day studio personnel informed the Imagineering team that the nighttime janitorial crew had asked them to keep the lights on overnight. Needing more convincing to ensure that their work was that terrifying, Crump and Gracie obeyed the request, but playfully installed motion sensors that shut off the lights and turned on the effects when triggered. The next morning, the team came back to find all their effects operating, and to their amusement, a broom lying haplessly on the floor. They soon found out that the janitors would never return. By 1961, guide maps and park flyers had begun promoting the debut of a new attraction at Disneyland, now officially known as the Haunted Mansion, that was set to open in 1963. Construction on the building began in 1962 and ended on the promised finish date the following year. A dismaying observation, however, became quite evident as the attraction itself was nowhere near close to being ready, and would remain so for the next 6 years. New Orleans Square opened 4 years later in July of 1967, but the Haunted Mansion remained lifeless. For the next 2 years, the Haunted Mansion's stately manor stood mysteriously in its own corner of New Orleans Square. Curious onlookers were met at the mansion's closed gates with a sign explaining that Imagineers were busy collecting 999 ghosts seeking active retirement. Nonetheless, during the 6-year period while the mansion stood empty, rumors began to dwell about the attraction. Some whispers suggested that a test audience was given a preview of the attraction in 1963 and found it so terrifying that one participant died from fear. Another report suggested that the mansion was built as a home for Walt Disney, and the gates were there to keep curious guests away. And another darker tale told of real malevolent spirits that haunted the attraction. Of course, none of these stories held any truth. The prolonged delay was actually due to a combined effect of Walt's involvement with the 1964 World's Fair and the cascading repercussions of his untimely death in 1966. Walt had recruited a majority of his Imagineering team to work on creating attractions for the World's Fair, forcing the Imagineers to quell development on the Haunted Mansion. During these years of purgatory, the Haunted Mansion went through a disquieting metamorphosis. Without a unified story, the remaining Imagineering team were faced with a huge dilemma. Should a haunted attraction at Disneyland be scary or funny? Marc Davis and Claude Coates took the responsibility of answering this question. Walt had described the Haunted Mansion as a retirement home for ghosts, but both Imagineers had distinctly different visions on how to accomplish that. Coates wanted a darker attraction with an eerie atmosphere, whereas Davis felt it needed to be a lighter experience filled with characters and gags. Assisting in this process was Buddy Baker and Xavier Atencio, who worked on materializing the music and words respectively for the attraction's soundtrack and resulting song, Grim Grinning Ghosts. The music and script perfectly married both tones that Coates and Davis had wanted, and thus bled into the final design for the mansion, which begins with the air being deathly still and ends with a swinging wake. Up until Walt Disney's passing, the Haunted Mansion was still a guided walk-through attraction with an adjoining exhibit called the Museum of the Weird, fathered by Rolly Crump, which was to be an exhibition of strange and unique artifacts from all across the world. Without Walt's guiding presence and final say, the Imagineers decided not to pursue Crump's museum concept and had the Haunted Mansion undergo a major shift from a walk-through house to a tracked ride. Employing a technology that was introduced at the World's Fair called the Omnimover, the technology provided a new dimension of storytelling for the Haunted Mansion. The Omnimover is a continuously moving ride system that controls the passenger's line of sight by rotating the vehicle in different directions. In addition to dramatically increasing capacity, the Imagineers could now turn guests into specific directions at different points in a scene, allowing greater focus on specific show elements. The shape of the Omnimover vehicles also allowed for audio speakers to be placed directly behind the heads of the passengers, adding an audibly spooky effect. Much like its neighbor Pirates of the Caribbean, the Haunted Mansion's layout also contributed to the design of the attraction. Take, for instance, the iconic stretching room at the beginning of the attraction. The windowless and doorless chamber is actually an elevator designed to take guests underneath the park's berm and railroad track and into a 37,000 square foot show building where the ride portion of the attraction actually takes place. Now with a settled story and a home ready to receive its ghostly occupants, it was now a matter of adding characters and voice work to fill the mansion's halls. Frequent Disney vocal talent Paul Frees provided the memorably unsettling voice of the unseen, yet often heard, ghost host. Leota Toombs gave voice to Little Leota at the end of the attraction and physically portrayed the ghostly psychic Madame Leota, while Eleanor Audley provided her disembodied voice. The 5 singing busts in the graveyard were played by Vern Rowe as Rollo Rumpkin, Thurl Ravenscroft as Uncle Theodore, Chuck Schroeder as Cousin Algernon, Jay Mayer as Ned Nubb, and Bob Ebright as Phineas P. Puck. Finally, after several years of prolonged work and anticipation, the Haunted Mansion's gates opened to the mortal public on August 9, 1969. The reception was overwhelming, with Disneyland setting a new record of more than 82,000 guests admitted that day. The attraction featured 999 happy haunts, but only one of these spirits had as much of a reputation as the mysterious Hatbox Ghost. The Hatbox Ghost resided in the attic where guests would glimpse him as his skull vanish, only to reappear again floating in his hatbox. The character debuted with the attraction in 1969, but was removed shortly afterwards. There were many tales surrounding the reason behind the figure's disappearance, although the real reason as to why he was removed was simply because the Imagineers couldn't quite get the Hatbox effect to work properly. The Hatbox Ghost's sudden exodus created a cult following among fans, and he became a fixture of merchandising in the following years. Eventually, in 2015, the Hatbox Ghost permanently returned to his cryptic state in the attic, just as he had done 46 years prior. As guests enjoyed the ghoulish delights of the Haunted Mansion in Anaheim, duplicates of the attraction's audio animatronics, props, and sets were already on their way to Walt Disney World for use in a second mansion being constructed at Magic Kingdom. This version of the Haunted Mansion was located in the park's Liberty Square. As a result, the attraction's new look was inspired by the Dutch Gothic architecture of the mansions found in New England during colonial times. Walt Disney World's Haunted Mansion debuted on the same day as the resort's inaugural opening on October 1, 1971. Tokyo Disneyland followed the same path, with its mansion opening in the park's Fantasyland on April 15, 1983. Nearly 9 years later, the Haunted Mansion was completely re-envisioned when it arrived at Disneyland Paris in 1992. Known as Phantom Manor, this attraction was reimagined with an expanded storyline and a darker setting, while still possessing some of the classic traits that made the original Haunted Mansion a fan favorite. Be that as it may, Phantom Manor exists truly as its own unique attraction, and as such, will be given its own proper tribute. Similarly, Hong Kong Disneyland became the home of its own mansion adventure with the introduction of Mystic Manor in 2013. The Haunted Mansion's coveted role in the Disney parks has given the attraction an opportunity to enthrall fans and even extend its reach outside of the park gates. The attraction has spawned a media franchise encompassing music album releases, video games, comic book series, and even a feature film adaptation in 2003. A seasonal overlay for the Haunted Mansion, based on Tim Burton's The Nightmare Before Christmas, was introduced in 2001, and has enchanted visitors at both Anaheim and Tokyo Disneyland during the holiday seasons. The Haunted Mansion has one of the most intriguing queues found at any of the Disney parks. Upon reaching the hallowed grounds, guests find themselves in the mansion's stately cemetery and gardens, where some of the graves of the mansion's residents are found. Upon entering the mansion, guests are guided by coldly inanimate cast members into a small octagonal room filled with portraits of some of the mansion's former living residents. The ghost host delivers his introduction as the room begins to stretch. Suddenly, the room is illuminated with a flash of lightning, revealing the corpse of the ghost host hanging from the ceiling by a noose. A wall then opens, leading guests into a corridor of seemingly normal portraits that reveal a ghastly piece of art every time lightning flashes the hallway. The guests reach the loading zone and are instructed by cast members to board the doom buggies that will lead them through the mansion. Once they are boarded, the ghost host lowers the safety bar and begins narrating the tour through the mansion. Ascending to the second floor, the doom buggies cruise past an endless hallway on one side and the remains of the mansion's conservatory on the other. The Florida and Tokyo versions include a library and a series of twisting staircases. After passing through a hallway of possessed doors, the passengers are led into a room where Madame Leota is conducting a seance. Instruments float around the room as Leota summons the mansion's spirits to materialize into their ghostly forms. This leads into the ballroom scene where the first ghosts on the tour appear, dancing, eating, and conversing with one another. Leaving the ballroom, the Doom Buggies make their way into the mansion's attic, where they find disturbing portraits of Constance Hatchaway, the bride that killed every one of her husbands while she was still alive. Right before exiting the attic through the broken window, the passengers encounter the guiltful bride's haunting spirit. The Doom Buggies then descend backwards, where they enter the graveyard, being met at the gate by the terrified groundskeeper and his dog, the only living characters in the attraction. The graveyard is the climax of the attraction, as the rest of the mansion's spirits join in on the jamboree. At the ride's finale, the Doom Buggies enter a crypt where the 3 hitchhiking ghosts appear to board each individual ride vehicle. The riders then encounter the spirit of Little Leota, who reminds them to return soon, just as the Doom Buggies arrive at the exit. From what began as Walt Disney's novel idea of a delightfully unlivable retreat for the dead, the Haunted Mansion has etherealized into regions beyond. It has woven its way into every thread of Disney's genetic history, entrancing mortals to hurry back time and time again. Laid to rest by brilliant design, mystifying technical effects, and an aura of foreboding, the Haunted Mansion's lore has yet to be emulated, fortifying its longevity into the eternal afterlife.
Now I will raise the safety bar, and a ghost will follow you home.
If you would like to join our jamboree, there's a simple rule that's compulsory.
Hurry back.
Rest in peace.
Be sure to bring your death certificate
We would like your
if you decide to join us. Make final arrangements now. We've been dying to have you.